Welcome back to Senate Education. It is Thursday afternoon, March 11th, 2:47 p.m. We are now shifting gears and talking about COVID recovery. And this is something that we are partnering with our colleagues in appropriations on, and certainly the Agency of Education. And just to bring everyone back to for a moment, we did send Senate Appropriations a memorandum on February 19th that specified dollars going into what I guess you would call COVID recovery for students broadly, and there was this is for the expedited budget, and in that we did say we would like to have $4 million to the After School for All grants program to provide grants for children to attend summer and after school programs. Senate Appropriations is interested in knowing whether or not I think they would like for us to build some language around how those grants would be distributed. But we also know that there are a lot of people working on this issue right now, and nobody knows that better than the Secretary of Education, since he's been in contact with schools. He's also managing ESSER funds, et cetera. So we don't want to make any errors, nor do we want to duplicate work that's already being done. So I thought we would just take a few minutes and get an update from Secretary of Education. Mr. Secretary, I just brought us back to February 19th when we put that proposal out, something that I know you were helpful with when you were in our committee. And we also have Ms. Holly Morehouse here, who has also been tracking this work, working with us. So I'm wondering, Mr. Secretary, if you would just take some time to fill us in what your needs are, what you're supporting, what you're trying to do, and how we can be helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm thinking an efficient way to think about this is there's two parallel activities. One of them is the money, and we can glean a lot from that by looking at ESSER in particular, the ESSER funds, the Elementary Secondary Education Relief Funds. The other is sort of the planning process and where we as a state are relative to COVID response. So I think it's useful to look at the money because the ESSER program, under the CARES Act originally, ESSER was established back in April. No one knew what was in front of us. We knew schools were going to have costs to buy PPE, you name it. And the CARES Act was this bigger strategy. Underneath there was a discrete strategy for schools called ESSER. The idea was to get the money out to districts immediately. Who knows what's in front of us? And really, I would argue that was focused on reopening schools. And this was April, but people were already starting to anticipate what was going to be needed over the summer. PPE, shields, you name it, supplies, feeding kids. And that was the ESSER program. It was created in that instance, and Vermont received about $31 million. And we have the way that program's set up to 10% of that may be reserved by the SEA, the Agency of Education, and the 90% of it has to be delivered directly to school districts. So the bulk of the money has to go out to the districts directly. So at the point I just mentioned, that the structural aspect of ESSER is the same structure we have now for ESSER, both ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, what's about to be ESSER 3 tomorrow, apparently, even though the circumstances are changed for us. And that's important to acknowledge. And the agency set aside the temper. We've been reserving up to the maximum. We knew very early, even last April, that we were going to be attentive to any statewide work that needs to happen. Not a lot emerged other than the agencies need to have communication support. So we made some investment in some IT ability because we were managing a significant communications effort. Even like the vaccination program is almost 90% communications. But we've been keeping our powder dry on that state set aside money because we knew the next phase, sort of this recovery phase, when we start talking about, what are the needs, what's the impact on kids, there's going to be a whole lot of state level activity work that has to kick in. So ESSER 1, $31 million last April. Then recently in December, ESSER 2, $127 million. Same setup, state may reserve up to 10%, districts get 90% of the money. And we're just about to turn that on now for districts. And for our districts, that's what we're saying is that's really the money you should be using for recovery. Sort of the other challenge here, again, to speak specifically about Vermont, is that still the national narrative is about reopening schools. Of course, Vermont schools have been open, like many states, since September. So it's not really the costs and the money for us aren't really about reopening schools. And particularly when we start talking about ESSER 3, that's still very much, you hear the national narrative in the last 48 hours about whatever schools need to reopen. And it's important to acknowledge that our situation's a little different, and as is many states, are many states that are in a similar situation. So we figure ESSER 2 is about recovery for school districts. That's how we've been messaging that. When we look at ESSER 3, we start to see some elements of the recovery. And this is my comments to you earlier today, Senator Campion, that it's important to note that, once again, the ESSER 3, this is now going to be about $290 million for education in Vermont. It has specific, there's still the 90-10 split, state versus LEAs, the districts, but now there are specific targeted set-asides that have to be addressed. Learning loss, 5% set aside for that at the SEA level, 1% for summer programming, 1% for comprehensive after school. So the point is, this is going to be the significant pot of money that districts are going to leverage to do this work. There is already a prescription in the federal program to focus on summer, which everyone has as probably one of their prominent strategies right now, but also after school. So I just sort of point that out, that the federal money is already aligned that way. It's going to be very, I think, generous in terms of the need that we have as a state. And therefore, we're going to need to have a strategic conversation with all the stakeholders, including the General Assembly, about what is the best use of this sort of one-time money to really ensure, I think, all students have their needs met.
May I ask a quick question, Mr. Speaker? So you've said this ESSER 3, which is going to be signed hopefully today, that has the 290 million in it.
That's correct.
And that will come down, as you mentioned, there are certain percentages that are dictated that have to go to certain things. And you will still keep 10% of that. Is that accurate?
We may keep up to 10%. And it's our intention to do that. Okay.
All right. And that 10% would go, is that sort of a cushion? And you tell me, actually, what
it's reserved by the SEA, meaning and directed by the secretary, essentially, to focus on state level strategies relative to COVID relief. So, for example, one of the examples in our sort of regular meetings with Department of Mental Health on this, we know we're going to need to work on a solution in the Northeast Kingdom, just because of the situation with Northeast Kingdom Human Services right now. We could be using these state level funding to subgrant out to regional partnerships to address mental health, so just figuring out those kind of subgranting processes by which we would deal with regional issues and state level issues relative to the emergency that would transcend individual district boundaries, because the district money is really going to be focused on the district and their communities. But as soon as we start talking about cross district boundaries, integrated service delivery models, that's how we see that state level money functioning in the landscape. So we're, again, here too, we're going to need to have a strategic conversation about how to leverage those funds as the need emerge. So and to sort of transition over to the planning side of the conversation, that's how we figure out what the need is. So we have a lot of ideas, like we know a lot of the tools, like summer school, after school programming. These are tools we might have, but we need to pay attention, I think, initially as to what is the need. And that's where the planning comes into play. I will say, in this ESSER 3, there is a requirement that school districts have an ESSER 3 spending plan, and that they go through a local public comment process as they create their grant applications. So we're intending to bring over this recovery planning activity at the state level, which should position our districts very well to leverage their federal dollars. And that was one of our intentions by engaging in this planning process. So we see districts going into a first phase of needs assessment, real quick. Now, this is like a triage. We really need them to sort of at a high level figure out what does the student need in 3 domains. One of them is academics, social, emotional. The third domain is sort of the reconnection piece, which gets us into truancy issues. We need sort of a district by district assessment about what those needs are. And I say that because if you just take academics and this concept of quote unquote of learning loss, how that plays out at the kindergarten level is different than the high school level. and there's been such a mix of delivery models with kids. Not all kids have fallen behind, some have. I think we can guess that any kid that was at risk prior to the emergency is probably more at risk now. But those things need to be articulated at a sort of an initial level at the district, in a district regional basis. So that sort of initial phase to start to stand up what's out there, and we can sort of at the state level then sort of look for those patterns, because I'm guessing there will be patterns around truancy and engagement that will require, organization and collaboration from state services, such as the AOE and DCF and so forth. So the first sort of segment of that planning is to do a needs assessment that would be completed sometime before May 1st. Districts would then move into a prioritization of what their the strategies are, and then an implementation phase with a well-articulated sense of how to leverage summer over in the coming months. That would dovetail perfectly with these other federal dollars coming into play, because they're going to have to prioritize those strategies as part of the recovery work. So that's sort of the landscape right now. And my point to you earlier today was, we have to be attentive to coherence around this. Firstly, is that we're fortunate we're going to have sufficient resources to do the work. And I would say ESSER 3, for example, has a tail about to 2023. So it anticipates this work going on for some time. The challenge for us as a state is going to be, how do we make the best strategic use of these funds, not only to meet the near-term sort of needs of students as a result of the COVID emergency, but to think out the other end of this. For example, this idea of community schools or an integrated service delivery model is a very common solution for rural states. And I anticipate, when all this is over and done, if we're smart about this, we'll have leveraged these monies to leave that sort of in the landscape as a service delivery model more emphatically and well established in some of our regions that excuse me, currently don't necessarily have a well articulated service delivery model. So we have to have a very strategic conversation. So our challenge, one of our biggest challenges, is going to be coherence, I would argue, and to ensure that we're focusing on student need first and having that drive the organizational response, as opposed to starting with the organizational needs and then hoping we hit the student needs. It's a subtle difference, but I think we have to acknowledge right up front that we don't really know what the impact of this emergency is on kids, and we need to give the organization some space to do that initial assessment. And that's why we conclude, across multiple different perspectives, that why in person is so important, because it's hard to do that assessment if we don't have more regular contact with kids. I'll stop there. I mean, that's a long-winded introduction on the spot, but
it's very helpful. Thank you. I think my big question right now, just given timing, again, back to our February 19th letter, which I know you've seen, we did direct $4 million to the After School for All grants program as a way, again, to get so that these programs could hire staff, create new programs, allow families that might not have access. And the chair of appropriations is understandably looking for some language that would give direction to those. Can you just weigh in on if you're still comfortable in moving in that direction?
Yeah, I think I weighed in previously in saying, firstly, the strategy itself is one that's on the radar, totally consistent.
Right,
absolutely. Right. The question, which I had previously, is what's the source of the money? And that wasn't clear to me. And the point I'd make again is that districts are essentially probably going to be in the driver's seats in terms of spending the significant amount of funding, both in ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, to address these areas.
Yeah.
I think the tension is for us to then sort of help districts, and this is part of our planning activity that's happening around, can we do some planning around summer and around after school to make sure that districts are aware of what's out there, to understand when things are not out there, can we build up some capacity for them? So, right now in some areas, if you look at this as sort of like a menu option, like districts are going to be the driver's seat in terms of spending the money, and they're going to try to figure out what their priorities are. And we're going to help them do that and then help them make good choices relative to those priorities. In some areas of the state, the menu is very limited of options. Like there aren't community rec centers, for example. So we also simultaneously, as they start embarking down this path, we have to attend to, at the state level, building up some capacity in these regions. And that's where some of the state level funding and maybe the strategy that you're speaking to would be helpful, is to make sure that there are some options, that there are some program options available for school districts and for communities to leverage, because that's the very unequal part of our state. Not all states have the same resources, not to say they all should be the same, but there need to be some resources, and they need to be responsive to the needs of the community and the region. So we have to build up some options simultaneously as districts are going to be in the driver's seat to choose how to deploy those options.
Questions for Secretary French? Senator Persily.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary. One of my questions or concerns about the ESSER money is the timing, like specifically for the summer programs. We kind of know the dollar amount, but I don't know how much do you feel like you can get moving on summer programs before you get like the federal guidance, or do you think you could get ready?
It's more about cash flow for districts. So they have, we were talking with superintendents today, ESSER 1 applications are still being filled out. I mean, so that's $30 million. I would argue that's more than sufficient to run summer, and that money's in the bank essentially for them. That deadline for those applications closes on the 20th of March. So we need them to complete those applications. They've been rightfully focused on the CRF funding. But we have about maybe a third of the districts have submitted their ESSER 1 applications. We need them to ramp that up, and I fully expect them to do that. That money's available to run summer programs like right now. ESSER 2, we're going to turn on the ESSER 2 application literally like 2 days later after the 20th of March. That money also is here. It's in the bank. It's ready to go. In ESSER 3, the money will be here and in the bank. I mean, the money comes down very, very quickly, which was the intention. I made the observation that ESSER is probably imperfect to our needs right now, but it provides a very convenient, fast delivery system to get the money out to school districts. So that's happening very quickly. And districts, so from a cash flow standpoint, it's not an issue for them to manage that, and also to pull down, encumber, seek reimbursement. All those things will definitely available for them to do summer programming. For sure.
Please.
Okay, so that's good to know. And I guess maybe what my thinking of that $4 million is, which I think you were alluding to earlier, is how can we use it around those other communities that, well, maybe there's a school in every community basically, but maybe not the other community partners that would do an after school program. And if the other money is only for schools, that there's some statewide coordination and capacity building we could do right away as we prepare for this other bigger chunk of money. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I think that's really what I'm thinking the appropriate use of the state set aside funds is to really get into that space, identify those priorities. I've been thinking a lot about a subgranting process to leverage, and because it's hard for us to describe what the specific solution might look like in a rural community when they have different pieces of things they could bring together. But if we were to describe sort of the general parameters and then give them the opportunity to propose a solution using their resources, at least resources wouldn't be a barrier for them. And then it would allow us to focus those state set aside funds on the areas that really are lacking in the financial as a barrier. So it would be a win-win. But I think that's exactly how the state set aside funds are designed to function.
And when you say state set aside, that's the 10% for AOE?
That's the 10% at the Agency of Education.
Further questions, please? My only request, and I'm not saying this in any way to make extra to work, but if maybe what we can do is just, I think we'll need to build in some time where we can just have kind of regular conversations as these ESSER dollars come in, and we will also be working with the probes again to help guide when we can. In other words, I understand that some of them are specified, some of them are directed, but we're getting questions from constituents and colleagues, and the more that we know, I think and are equipped to respond, the better. So I would leave it. If ever there are updates that you think are important for us to hear, would be great. Even if you have things in writing that you think are important for us to have our eyes on and share with our colleagues, that would also be great. And certainly we'll be in contact to continue these conversations. But can't thank you enough for all that you're doing.
No, thank you. I mean, it's really helpful to have your support on this work. I mean, I've been using the phrase lately a lot. It's all good news, right? I've been saying it a lot with the vaccination program. It's been
Yeah.
really challenging from a
Yeah.
logistical standpoint, but I just keep saying it's all good news, people. We're on, as complex of all these things are, we're on the other side of it now. We're the lights at the end of the tunnel. Our challenge is coherence making and ensuring that student needs are met. We can do that very well as a state. I mean, we're strong on collaboration. So I would welcome the opportunity to share anything along those lines to help us do that. I think I would argue ESSER 3 is going to provoke an interest and a necessity for us to do that, because that's really a sizable amount of funding. And once again, on a national level, seems to be really responsive to the needs of large urban school districts that have never opened. For us, a state like Vermont that benefits from the small state minimum appropriation, we're going to be challenged on the coherence end, but we're up for it. And I think, we'll welcome, the partnership of the General Assembly, and it's that partnership that's going to make us successful, I'm sure.
And then I'd also just add past crossover to have somebody come in and talk with us just about how schools are faring right now. Yep. It is quite remarkable. I know some schools to our south and certainly to our west and all across the country. A lot of schools are closed, and a lot of children have not had these kinds of experiences that Vermont children have. And of course, it isn't across the state, but it would be great to hear an update.
Yeah, and I agree. It's I have a weekly call with my colleagues in other New England states, yes. And we've been open. All of the New England states have been open to some degree since the beginning. We've all had our ups and downs. But we, just in our call this morning, talking with the Rhode Island chief, totally different context and have some large urban school districts, but the themes are exactly the same. I mean, it's very uneven on a district by district basis. We're seeing indications that some kids have thrived actually during this environment. But once again, we know those students that are at risk beforehand are probably at greater risk now. And it's going to take some time to sort out. So I think it's helpful to have incremental updates, but also to adopt sort of a long view on this. And the funding will support that. As I mentioned, ESSER 3 will go out to 2023. So we just have to be patient and understand, how much stress and strain the system's under right now, just to keep the lights on a daily basis. But again, it's all good news.
Yeah. Senator Hooker, please.
Thank you. I do have a question. Secretary French, you talked about the needs assessment from the districts coming in by May, and with any luck, the legislature goes home in the middle of May, and I'm just curious to know, how, when will you have a good idea of what those needs are and how the money should be distributed?
Well, again, I think I appreciate the question. They're gonna have sufficient funding distributed to them under the ESSER program, and that allocation is not dependent on them articulating need. It's really an straight allocation based on their poverty level. So when we get that, just like we have with the other tranches of ESSER funding, it gets allocated on a poverty level out to the districts, and then they develop grant strategies. I think probably the most efficient tool to get at what you're interested in is how they translate their needs into priorities, and then what do their plan strategies look like. And that information, once again, there'll be a public comment period at the local level. So there's 60 some odd school districts. They'll have 60 some odd prioritizations. And I think that would be very useful information for the General Assembly. And we can also do reporting on how they're spending their money as well. We've done that with the other ESSER funds as well, or the CRF funding. So we can provide any of that sort of granular input. But I think there'll be patterns. I think we should expect there to be patterns, like the issues of truancy and engagement. We've heard, we know that's out there. That's why it's one of our focus domains, but we want to be attentive to how that might play out regionally on a different level. So there'll be patterns for sure.
Thank you.
Senator Perchlik.
Just to go back to the after school thing, we're going to hear from Dr. Morehouse here in a little bit, but I guess I just want to express my interest is that we get a program out as soon as possible, because I already know parents talking about what they're going to do with their kids this summer and things like that. So it sounds like the money's there, and it's just the logistical issue about how to get that out under the street under guidance that's acceptable, and part of this coherence and coherent plan that you're talking about. So, I don't know exactly what our role is in that, but I guess I just want to encourage that if the money that we're talking about in the small budget bill can be helpful to get it happening quickly, that's different than the other money, then that's our goal with that money.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think it's useful to understand, all the different funding streams, what their restrictions are, what the pros and cons, but also I think we'll do well to stay focused on what the need is of the students. We know we need to build out some capacity, and Holly's been involved in some of those planning activities. We also know people are anxious for guidance about the summer, both from ACCD, the health department, and so forth. We're just not very keen at predicting the future that far out. So we have to encourage patience, but we're well aware that people need some indication of how the summer will proceed. And we have that on our planning sort of calendar.
Other questions? Thank you for staying over with us. I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you. Dr. Morehouse, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming early and hearing the testimony. Would appreciate your thoughts. We are, as you know, focused on the dollars right now that we did suggest to appropriations to put in the expedited budget. We know that there are many trains leaving the station, but I think it would be helpful to hear overall your response, if you will, to Secretary French, and let us know how you're feeling as it relates to gearing up for the summer. But first and foremost, if you wouldn't mind reintroducing yourself for the committee.
Thank you so much. So my name is Holly Morehouse. I'm the Executive Director of Vermont After School. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about summer and your committee's attention to summer and how quickly summer is coming up on us. Summer programs that need to open in less than 3 months. And some programs are full, programs are making decisions to go smaller. Parents are making decisions, families are making decisions. So the timing on this is really, really crucial. I have to say, I cannot express to all of you and those who have no longer would know, I am so excited about ESSER 3. ESSER 3 is amazing. And the set aside for summer learning and after school gives us as a state, and we are so well poised as a state with the Universal After School Task Force, the new governor's group that's working on summer, to move forward in a major way using those one-time funding over the next, it's 2021, 2022, and 2023, I believe, the use of those funds. There is enough money in there to do across our low and middle income elementary and middle schools, comprehensive after school and summer programming all across the state, if we as a state have the will and that comprehensive view that I think Secretary French is speaking to. I think delivering what our children and youth need, and I do think that we have data on where they are and what they need. We do know that this needs to be a summer about connection, healing, reentry, getting outside, being with peers, and learning in all forms of learning, whether it's learning about yourself as you climb a mountain or learn to kayak, or if it's to catch up on your math and reading, or to engage in robotics, or learning how to relate to friends. We are hearing from families that some young people are nervous about reentry and hesitating to come back. We know that isolation and loneliness is a really huge issue. So I feel like we have enough data to know that we need to get kids together in summer programs. I feel like we know that now. And as I said, summer programs are, they're already in planning. Like they're planning now. And we're hearing some that are saying, well, because of COVID, we're going to reduce to 5 weeks. But we're also working really closely with the Pediatricians Association and VCHEP out of UVM and the Department of Health. And we just held a state call forum on Tuesday to get information on the guidance out. And Dr. Brina Holmes spoke to the field then. And the message that we're hearing is that as vaccine rates go up and as we move into summer, that we need to move forward full-fledged planning for summer, right? And youth being outside and taking field trips and being able to go swimming and having the windows down and doing an expansion of enrollment, not a reduction of enrollment. I think we're at a point in time in the state that we need to be saying that loudly and boldly, so that people are confident, that youth are confident and looking for opportunities, that parents are confident and signing their children up, and that programs know how many staff to hire and how to get the staff trained. When I look across the tools that we have and the precedents we have, the After School for All grant program that was established when the legislature gave the original $600,000 to expand after school to, funding access to after school in summer, is a program that if money were in there tomorrow, we could open a grant competition and get people moving. And I guess my interest is, how do we get people moving quickly? That's the quickest path I can see on how to do that, because it's putting out an announcement and broadcasting to the state that this is a priority. There is funding available. Expand your programs, open your doors, hire staff, design curricula. At Vermont After School, we have a 7-component, 12-page summer campaign plan to back this up with training for staff, staff recruitment, social emotional learning supports, and we're really pleased to be working closely with the governor's office and the other members of that. The other precedent with the After School for All as an option for this funding is that it does run through AHS and the Child Development Division instead of AOE. But the precedent that I see there, and I'm not trying to say one agency over, I'm just looking at the precedent of this, as though throughout COVID recovery, like when you look at the remote learning childcare hubs in the fall, that was the Child Development Division that stood that up. When you look at the essential childcare, that was the Child Development Division. When you look at the support for summer programs last year, that was the Child Development Division, Department for Children and Families. So when I look at what can we do this summer to move quickly, that's the agency that I'm thinking, right? And the other thing that I do realize and have total respect for is all the planning and the recovery efforts that the Agency of Education is working on with schools. And I don't begin to understand the level of detail when you're looking at which kindergartners need which kind of support and so forth. I want to support that work and partner in that work however possible. I guess I'm seeing this as, I think Secretary French talked about, as a capacity building, right? Another path forward and he also talked about the schools being a stress system, which they are right now, and they're trying to handle all of that. So with After School for All, or through another approach, and this has come up in the Universal After School Task Force as well, when I said we need to be all in, we need a way that it doesn't force schools to carry every bit of the load, right? So After School for All and these other opportunities through the Child Development Division and AHS, has allowed Parks and Rec programs to step in and help out. It has allowed childcare providers to step in and help out, other youth serving organizations. There are schools in that mix who already do this, that are ready to move, that have done childcare hubs in the fall and did programming. So I see that process that AHS has set up as one that they're hitting a lot of segments of the field and using whatever resources are available locally to make what needs to happen for children and youth, instead of saying, we've got to wait for the pause there for any questions.
Senator Perschler.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. Do you see a way that the individual schools could participate in school districts could participate in like a statewide After School for All grant program, as far as helping, like if they have money and they want to support after school, but instead of them just trying to figure out in their own district, which they might be able to do, but you just see if we're looking at a statewide program as well as the districts having really the money, how those two things connected, or do they have to be separate?
No, I think we've got to connect every resource we have. I will say with After School for All, over the last 2 years that it's run, there are schools that have received those funds as well. So there are schools that are very well versed in after school and summer and these full day summer programs that are about enrichment and activity and adventure based. But they're not all our schools. And in some communities, the schools are not in that space at all yet. And it's another community provider or a partner who is in that space. In some cases, schools contract or partner with somebody like a YMCA who comes in and actually runs the program. In other places, it seems to be completely separate, and there's the school day and the school year, and then there's everything else that happens in the community for young people. So I see it as a mix. I see the $4 million that you all are considering as a way to do that capacity building, right? To sort of level that playing field. And then I think there's a whole nother initiative that I am so anxious to work on with the Agency of Education and other partners about that bigger vision, right? Of what do we do with ESSER 3, and what do we, how do we support schools who are, in different spaces in running after school and summer. I mean, to run a summer program, we really need 8 to 10 weeks of full day summer programming. That's a lot to ask of teachers and schools, but we already have a number of players that do that already over the summer. The other sensitivity I want to have is that there are programs that are enrolled and have been planning for months for summer and are ready to move forward. And if all of a sudden at the last minute, we swoop in and we lay another system down on top of it, where now we're running something else out of the school that's free or different, that's now competing with the thing that's already in place, that's going to do harm. And then when these one-time dollars go away, if we've, sort of challenged the other players who are in this space to the point where they close, then we have nothing after 2023. So it is so essential that as schools think about their plans, they're looking, community-wide and regionally wide at who those partners are and how to play with them and partner with them, so that we do get beyond 2023 to that universal after-school picture that is so exciting and has this amazing web of partnership and collaboration and choice. I think choice is a really, really important for children, youth, and families, that it's not everybody sitting in the same room all summer or doing the same exact activities. There's a lot of choices and movement and different programs and formats that might work for you. That's part of the magic of after school and summer, and I would hate to lose that as well.
So going forward, I've just been in contact a little bit with the Propes, because I know they're looking at a number of different things right now. And as we've said all along, there are many different vehicles leaving the station that could help support the After School for All grant. But I'm wondering, have you been in contact? Have you been in contact with appropriations or testified yet on this?
We have not been asked to testify on this.
Okay. And then also all of the work that you just mentioned going forward, really to have a robust after school and summer programs, that's work that you will work with the agency on. Is that a normal partnership? Just trying to get a sense of our role in some of these things. Of course, whether it's the legislature appropriating dollars or perhaps putting out guidance language around grants, et cetera. But really, is there another role for us, or is that something that you would normally, or you plan to partner with the agency on?
We definitely plan to partner. So we partner closely and have grants and contracts with the Agency of Education, the Department of Health, the Department of Mental Health, the State Treasurer's Office, and the Child Development Division, Department for Children and Families, because the field of after school isn't just schools
Right.
or 21C, right? So we have all of that. So, so my vision, right, as a state, as we look at this broad vision for what do we want to do around after school and summer, I would love to see all those players at the table. And that is another piece of the After School for All program, is that there is an oversight committee that is cross-agency, and it was created intentionally. It goes back to, it was actually an intention of the legislature in a previous bill to have a state oversight committee. And this is something that's come up in the Universal After School Task Force, and I think is absolutely critical at this point in time. And if there is any bill language that your committee might consider, is how to firmly establish that cross-sector oversight committee that has all those different departments and agencies and stakeholders represented, so that we are now and over the next 3 years thinking really intentionally about after school and summer, so that we are not in 2023 forming a new task force that's going back and starting at the beginning and redoing the work of the Universal After School Task Force, but that we have somebody really watching it, and that it's really it's an important education issue, but it's not only an education issue. And just as a point, and this week and next week, the Child Development Division is rolling out some childcare licensing grants through, I think they call it CURSA, but it's the childcare side of the federal dollars. So we always have this education side and childcare side, and then you have the older youth and teen programs that kind of fall in the gaps in some of the rec programs. So, we need that cross-sector vision. And I think this is a really important point in time to be able to take the work of the Universal After School Task Force, firmly establish a state committee or council or advisory group or whatever that needs to be called, to carry this work forward and to move quickly for this summer, so that we can't miss the summer. We missed last summer in a lot of ways for a lot of reasons. I get it, but
Sure.
we can't miss this summer. And I do worry about the timing of ESSER 3 or ESSER, to address this summer.
Other questions for Dr. Morehouse? Senator Perchlik.
Not more of a comment or it is a comment instead of a question, but it's just about just saying, I think it's a good idea that our $4 million suggestion to appropriations, even hearing what Secretary French said, that I hope we continue with that. And because my understanding that bill would happen pretty quick, get to the governor quick. So then folks like Holly could, start building on capacity right away, why the agency and maybe we would then work on something like this oversight and coordinating committee could work on the 2-year plan or the 3-year plan till we get to a permanent funding for Universal After School and Summer Program.
I agree. I just re-forwarded our letter to Senators Kitchell and Balint, and Dr. Morehouse. I would recommend you reach out to both of them as soon as possible later today.
I will do that.
I think that would be helpful. Other questions? So, Dr. Morehouse, we'll have you back in depending on what appropriations decides with this expedited budget to help them with language around how dollars may be distributed. I kind of loathe to do it now only because I'd rather wait to see what they are going to do, and then we can go from there.
That sounds great. Thank you.
And if you would let us if you would please be back in touch with me after you've been in touch with Senators Kitchell and Balint, that would be helpful for me to follow up with them again as well and see what everyone is planning to do. Any other
Absolutely.
questions for Dr. Morehouse? Okay, thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. You too. Appreciate it.
Okay. Last item on the agenda, which has following up on yesterday's discussion, waiting study. Mr. Desmarais, we left you yesterday with a number of different discussion points that we thought would be worth incorporating into a new draft. And again, the plan is to have a vote tomorrow and send this to appropriations and then onto the floor. So just to reiterate, this is as Senator Perchlik said in the banner today, an implementation plan, not a study. Thank you for pointing that out again to my constituents and the people of the state of Vermont. We hope that, I know it's a priority for the pro tem and for for many others. So I'm hoping we can do something, and it looks like we might be getting closer. So, Mr. Desmarais, thank you so much for coming up with a new bill. I know I've printed it out and have had a look at it, and if you wouldn't mind taking us through it, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
We're looking at 2.1, is that what we have?
2.1,
Thank
correct.
you. Great,
Yep.
thank you.
And do you want me to bring it up on the screen?
I look to my colleagues. Do people need it?
Is it on the website? I haven't seen it.
Is it on the website? I found it in an email, but that
It is on the
it's on the
website.
website. Okay. Okay. Let us know if you find it. Give everyone a moment. And that's only my personal preference. It's just if we can read it from here, or but if someone needs it up, just let me know. You're muted, Senator Perschlick.
Which bill are we talking about again?
Oh, sorry. No, this is S13. This is the strike all the weighting study, people weighting factors, not study implementation plan, draft 2.1.
2.1. Okay, thank you.
Do you have it, Senator Perschlick? Otherwise, I will email you a copy.
No, yeah, I'm okay.
Okay, great. Okay. Mr. Desmarais, if you would. Please.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So for the record, Jim Desmarais, that's counsel. We are walking through draft 2.1 of your amendment to S13. So first of all, we've added findings. These findings are from the original S13 drafted by Senator Baruth. I'll just read through them. First, talks about Act 173, which directed the agency to undertake a study examining and evaluating the current formula used to weight economically disadvantaged students, English language learners, and secondary level students in Vermont for purposes of calculating equalized pupils. The study was also to consider whether new cost factors and weights should be included in the equalized pupil calculation. The findings from that report were stark, say that neither the factors considered by the current formula nor the value of the weights reflect contemporary educational circumstances and costs. The report also found that the current values for the existing weights have weak ties, if any, with evidence describing the difference in the cost of educating students with disparate needs or operating schools in different contexts. And then it goes on to say, as a corrective to this situation, the major recommendations of the report are straightforward, specifically that the General Assembly increase certain of the existing weights and that add population density as a new weighing factor, given the report's finding that rural districts pay more to educate a student. However, given the statewide nature of Vermont's education funding system and the reality that any change in the weighting formula is complex due to its relationship to other educational policies and will produce fluctuations in tax rates across the state, the General Assembly has chosen to develop a phased approach to revising the weighting formula. Pause there. Do you want me to keep going, or do you want to talk about?
I will look at any time anyone would like Mr. Desmarais to pause, please. I'm reading, so please just go ahead and shout it out.
Okay. Then we go on to the creation of the task force. And lines 16 to 18 now read, the task force shall recommend to the General Assembly an action plan and proposed legislation to ensure that all public school students have equitable access to educational opportunities, taking into account the report.
Desmarais, I'm sorry, you said lines Ours is not numbered. Are you mean recommendation 16 or?
I'm on page 2.
Yep.
I'm on line 16.
Oh, yes, and ours are not numbered.
Oh, I see.
At least mine is not, so I would, but that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm on the creation of the task force in 2A. There's some new highlighted language.
Thank you.
Talks about having task force coming up with an action plan and proposed legislation. And then it goes on to on page 3 in subsection C. For those with have lines, it's line 11. Powers and duties. The task force shall recommend again to the General Assembly an action plan and proposed legislation to ensure that all public school students have equitable access to educational opportunities, taking into account the report and shall. I moved up number 2. So 1 is to recommend a recommendation around weighting factors, and 2 is to consider the use of categorical aid, either with weighting factors or instead of weighting factors. Because there's a big gain issue here is which way to go. Do you do weighting or do you do categorical aid? So I moved that up in the build language. And then on page 4, the third task, it used to say recommend whether and how to ensure that. Now it says recommend how to ensure that school districts are using funding to meet needs. And then in 4, I just referenced the specific report issued by the Vermont Tax Structural Commission in February. And then I made a number of references to categorical aid as an option to weights to be consistent throughout these description of duties and powers. So you'll see that in 5, in 6, and in 8. Then on page 5, we have a addition to the language around the consultant in section D, line 4, for those of you who have that. And now it says that the consultant shall have expertise and experience in providing advice on Vermont's education funding and tax system, and should be nationally recognized in the field of education funding and tax systems. There's a new subsection E, which requires the task force to collaborate with the V's. The subsection F on the report, again, page 5 again, references that has to, in its report, report on its action plan and proposed legislation. On page page 6, under subsection H, used to have assistance from the Agency of Education, but think about this further, given that this is a majority of legislators on this task force, it seems appropriate that you should get technical assistance from JFO and legal assistance from me. So I put that in there.
Okay, thank you.
And then section 3 is the new language around intention going forward. So it reads, during the second year of the 21-22 biennium, the House and Senate Committees on Education, the House Committee on Ways and Means, and the Senate Committee on Finance shall consider the action plan and legislation proposed by the task force. It's the intent of the General Assembly that it passed legislation during the second year of the biennium that implements changes to how education is funded to ensure that all public school students have equitable access to educational opportunities. And this is a positive vote of both the House and Senate, and approved by the governor, would be required to implement these changes. And then the appropriation, did we add a member? Why have I changed the appropriation?
Did we add a number of meetings?
We added, yeah, I'm sorry, I missed that. We added,
You have it on page 6.
Double
Maybe I
the
did-
meetings.
yeah, I doubled the meetings. I didn't highlight that. Sorry, I missed that. But we've doubled the meetings from 6 to 12. And that is it. So we still have that hole
Yeah,
on page 7 in terms of the appropriation for the consultant.
I guess for me, wondering, I think my colleagues have probably been more involved over the years with creating these kinds of these things. Anybody have or even Mr. Demaray, a recommendation on what we might say there? I mean, we had some guidance when we were looking to create a literacy person and other, but when we are putting something out, how do we usually handle that?
Well, not to steer this in terms of the consultant, but given the framing of the language around a consultant, I would imagine that Tammy Colby or Pincus would be in the running for that.
That's helpful.
They both have experience, so that it's not like they're getting up to speed from zero.
Yep.
So I don't know what to start with. I would, as a placeholder there, I would say maybe 40,000. Might be a number, might be too high, but something between 20 and 40, I think would be a place to start.
And
Senator Hooker?
I have a question about the consultant. You said nationally recognized. Does that imply like some kind of national certification in?
No, we've used that language before, just to say there has to be a player, basically.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to recommend, and maybe I'm wrong. 40 does strike me as low, but it seems to me that this kind of work in the number of staff that they would probably hire, it's going to warrant more. And I'm wondering if, and again, not directing this in any way, is there a way, Mr. Demaray, for you to get a sense from your colleagues who staff appropriations, what we have spent in the past for Dr. Colby or Dr. Pike, just to give us an understanding, again, not directing it, but just what these kinds of things run.
Well, the last one for Picos was 300,000, I believe. This is a more limited engagement,
Yep.
and already based on work that's been done, and for a more limited time period. So I don't remember what was paid for UVM's work on the report last time, the waiting study. I can find that out, but they've already done that work. It's going to be a much bigger number than this would be, I would think. Another way of asking that question is maybe JFO would have a good sense for what this would be. I'm not sure.
I think, Approps will take testimony and come up with it, but I think we should help to give them a starting point. Senator Perslick.
Yeah, I think it really matters what they do, because the consultant is just to assist with executing its powers and duties of the task force. So they could ask the consultant to do a lot or a little. So it's kind of hard to determine it. But I agree with you. When he said 40, I thought that was possibly low as a maximum amount if they really want them to do some new modeling and spend a lot of time with go to all the meetings, things like that, then it's probably going to be more.
Senator Lyons?
Right. I was thinking maybe talking with Catherine Benham. She's been very helpful with consultants. So she may have an idea. But between everyone we've just recommended, we'll get an average. We'll get a good piece, a good suggestion.
Mr. Demaray, are you comfortable reaching out to Ms. Benham on our behalf?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
That would be great. And in the meantime, I think that's probably the best spot to start. I think Senator Lyons is right. And I'm guessing it's going to be closer to 100, but I could be wrong. We could also put in, would anybody like a volunteer opportunity? But I'm inclined to think it's going to be close to 100, but I could, again, gives people flexibility around what they might be asking for of this group. So, Okay, other questions or comments regarding the walkthrough? How, just to take everyone's temperature, people feel comfortable moving in this direction tomorrow? We'll put a dollar amount, gives people time to look at things this evening. Again, we are moving in this direction, an implementation plan that also answers some questions that are outstanding. And I feel like this is good work. Okay, great. Okay, not seeing any questions. Thank you, Mr. Desmarais. Thanks for reaching out to Ms. Benham. Really appreciate it.
Did you want me to walk through the summer program language? We didn't do
No,
that.
I don't think so. And the only reason I'd rather wait, and I was just in contact with the pro tem a little bit while we were talking to Dr. Morehouse. I'd rather wait and see what they come up with in terms. That way, we know that will we need something or not, and then we can move from there. And I feel like if we do need something, it's something we can work on a little bit tomorrow. We could work on a little bit next week, and just and ask them to put that language in. Is the way I'm thinking about it. Okay. Senator Perslet, question? Nope. Okay. Any other questions? Tomorrow, again, we do have hoping to move this, hoping to move S100 with, and again, I'm more than happy to continue. We will have more testimony tomorrow on S100, and I'm happy to continue testimony next week, but you want to advance that to the next stage, and as well as our amendment to S16. But seeing no other questions, always feel free to be in contact. And I do hope, if you don't mind, reserving a little extra time tomorrow if we need it. But for now, it looks like we finished a little bit early. So I hope everybody can get outside and enjoy themselves.
Senator Campion, can we chat?
Yep, absolutely.
Shall I